What's up, guys, and welcome to a special Saturday edition of Player Pool. Going to be breaking down the Saturday games for the NFL Wild Card round. We got two relatively low-scoring games, at least in the projections, and I can break them down here in a minute. I think one game stands out to me as the more interesting game to focus on, and I'll get into it right after this. What's up, guys? Simon Edwards at Pumacom here with Heat Seeker Sports, and you're watching Player Pool. Going to be doing a special two-game edition of Player Pool. We're going to be covering the Saturday slate for the NFL Wild Card round, build some DraftKings Showdown lineups, and go over the favorite plays for DraftKings contests with this two-game slate. I'll give a little bit of insight into Showdowns as well towards the end of the show, and I'll probably put out at least the Showdown as an individual episode for the late game a little bit later on. So keep an eye out for that. You're going to want to subscribe to the channel so that you can get an alert for that. I'm also trying to get to 1,600 subscribers by the end of the wild card round. So if you guys can hit the subscribe button, I'd definitely appreciate that. Hit the like button as well, because 30 likes triggers my favorite plays in the comment section as we get closer to lock. And I have a little bit more time to hammer down what my favorite plays are going to be. So make sure to hit that like button, hit subscribe, and let's dig into this thing. All right, so we're looking at the two-game slate on DraftKings. We got the Chargers versus the Texans. It's a 42.5-point total with the Chargers as 3-point favorites in that one. And we got the Ravens versus the Steelers, which is... last I checked was a 44.5-point total, but let me double check and see where it's at now. Looking at now a 43.5-point total with Pittsburgh as 9.5-point dogs in this one. So very heavy favorites on Baltimore, which is interesting because Pittsburgh has basically owned Baltimore ever since Lamar Jackson became the quarterback. And they lost earlier in this year, in the second time that they played each other, but that was more of a factor of George Pickens was out in that game. So they didn't have George Pickens in the game that they lost against the Ravens this season. So, when you're missing your top weapon, it doesn't matter how good your game plan is. If you can't put up points against Baltimore, then you can't win the game. So I'm going to go and share over right now a look at how Lamar Jackson has performed against Pittsburgh, so we can get an idea of what the highest owned, I believe, highest owned quarterback on the slate is playing against a team that he has historically struggled against. Lamar Jackson drawing a 37.9% ownership level right now. And if you look at his past performances, he did pretty well in that last game against them, had 207 yards passing, 3 touchdowns. See if he had any rushing touchdowns. No rushing touchdowns. Looks like Lamar has actually never had a rushing touchdown against the Steelers, which is interesting. Lamar had 3 passing touchdowns in that game. As I mentioned, the previous game, he threw 207 with 1 passing touchdown. He had 236 with no passing touchdowns, 253 with 1 passing touchdown, 208 with 2 passing touchdowns, 161 with 1 passing touchdown. You guys get the idea. And you see these games, they only won the second game of this season. Prior to that, the last game that they won with Lamar as the starter was way back in 2019, and that's when they won 26 to 23. So it was a slim victory in that one. So basically, Mike Tomlin has owned Lamar Jackson in this matchup. Lamar Jackson, inactive for a lot of these games, but at the same time, in the games that he has played against them, he has not done well. And look at these scores in these games. We're looking at 16-18, 10-17, 10-17, 13-16, 16-14, 13-16, 19-20, 14-19. And on top of that, the Pittsburgh defense is still a solid defense. So if we look back at the historic matchups, the Pittsburgh still has a solid defense going up against Lamar. They do have Derrick Henry, obviously, now. But Derrick Henry in that first game, they still only scored 16 points against the Steelers. So, this could be a super low scoring game. That total might be a little bit high on it, actually. And that spread seems a little bit ridiculous given the history between these two teams. But obviously, like I said, with Henry on the team now, it changes things a little bit. But it's still Pittsburgh team that has dominated the Ravens as long as Lamar Jackson has been on the team. So, that's going to be an interesting situation for us where we could fade Lamar Jackson and fade 37% of that ownership by not using him. If we're doing, I'd say like 20 lineups or something like that, I think we can get away with not putting Lamar in, or at least putting him in like very minimal lineups. If we look at Justin Herbert, Justin Herbert has been coming alive recently. He's seen 31 points, 24 points, 23 points. He's just come alive recently, and he's facing off against a Houston team that is allowing 17.3 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position. This game is projected to be a lot tighter. I think in that first game, I think Pittsburgh has the potential to upset Baltimore. Baltimore has been allowing 19.8 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position. That's going to set up Russ Wilson for a decent game. Russell Wilson has been very mediocre recently. 11 points in the last game against Cincy, the worst defense in the league, or one of the worst defenses in the league. Prior to that, he had 18 against Kansas City, 17 versus Baltimore. Those are respectable scores. 30 against Cincy and 16 against Cleveland. They're respectable scores because we're looking at a couple games with very low projections, and Russ Wilson is only projected at about 10% ownership in this one. And you can see in week 16, 17 DraftKings points against Baltimore. In week 11, only 7.3 DraftKings points against Baltimore, which is interesting. He did start in that one. He had 36 attempts and 23 completions in that one. So somehow he had 7.3 DraftKings points in that one. But, I could definitely see Russell Wilson being the leading scorer in this slate, which is going to make it interesting for building with him because he's only 10% projected ownership. That'll put us against 10% of the field as opposed to 90% of the field if you want to go in that direction. CJ Stroud, he's just been struggling all year, but Nico Collins is in a really good matchup against the Chargers. The only problem is that the Chargers and everybody on the planet knows that Nico Collins is the guy that's going to be the focus of this offense. And CJ Stroud has been struggling. The offensive line has been weak, and they're playing against the Chargers, who have allowed 17.2 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position. So they're right underneath the Texans as far as points allowed. So they're basically same amount of points allowed to the quarterback position between these two teams. So very interesting there. I think if we want to get different when we're building our lineups, I think Russell Wilson's the way to go. There's a lot of recency bias against Russell Wilson right now, but they're playing in the playoffs. Russell Wilson's a guy who's been to a couple Super Bowls. He's won one, and the team in general is a well-coached team. Arthur Smith has even looked good this season as far as an offensive coordinator. He's been decent for the Titans in the past, and he got a bad rap in Atlanta as a head coach because he just wasn't a very good head coach versus an offensive coordinator. So, there could be a good situation for Russ Wilson. Like I said, he's going to have George Pickens healthy this week. Pickens against Baltimore. Baltimore has gotten a lot better on their defense against wide receivers. They're still allowing 21 DraftKings points a game to the wide receiver position. So Pickens will be in play, but he's going to have a more difficult matchup than we would have expected earlier in the season for this matchup to be. Earlier in the season, in that game that he did play, he scored 16.9 DraftKings points, had 12 receptions for 89 yards, and just had a good game against them. If we go to the good thing about these divisional rivalries is we have a lot of data to work with, so we can look at George Pickens' previous history against the Ravens. If we go to Pro Football Reference, just to get an idea of like a precedent, see if he's had some sort of consistent success against the Ravens. So we go to break down his game log: 8 for 89 last first game that they played. He was inactive for that second game. Doesn't look like he did too much in the second game of last year, but that could have been a rest situation. He had 130 yards and a touchdown against them in the first game of last season. And then he had 3 in his rookie season. Pretty much one of his, it's week 14 in that one. During his rookie season, he had 3 receptions for 78 yards. And obviously that was with Kenny Pickett as the quarterback, as opposed to Russell Wilson. So, so the pairing of Russ Wilson and George Pickens is much better than Kenny Pickett and George Pickens, but Pickens, good potential option for us this week if we want to stack with Russell Wilson. One guy who I like is Ladd McConkey. Ladd McConkey has a good matchup against the Texans. Ladd McConkey, they are more vulnerable to the slot receivers than they are to wideouts. We got Stingley on the perimeter with the Texans, so that's going to be a bad matchup for Quentin Johnson. So Ladd McConkey is going to stand out like a sore thumb on this slate as a guy with a really good matchup and a good opportunity. But I do like him. He's at 6,800 on top of it. He's very cheap, and I like his matchup. I do like Nico Collins' matchup too. The only problem is the defense is going to be focused on him, so that's not good for us. As far as running backs, Derrick Henry is going to have a middling matchup against Pittsburgh. They've been allowing 20.8 DraftKings points a game to the running back position. Jaylen Warren on the opposite side and Najee Harris. Baltimore's only been allowing 20.4 DraftKings points. They're also a middling matchup. Joe Mixon also has a middling matchup, 20.7 DraftKings points a game to the running back position. As far as the Denver, it's a different day there. So all middling matchups basically with the running backs. So you can't really go wrong with whatever direction that you decide to go. They all pretty much are the same. Derrick Henry is going to be game script based. If you think that Baltimore is going to win that game handily, Derrick Henry makes a lot of sense. If you think that Pittsburgh is going to keep it close or play with a lead, then I think that Justice Hill would make more sense as your running back if you wanted to start a Baltimore running back. Mixon, he's going to have a difficult matchup, and he hasn't been playing well towards the end of the season. Last time he had 20 DraftKings points was back in week 13, but he could certainly have a game any given week. Didn't start the whole game last week, only 3.8 DraftKings points, so we can scratch that off the board. But some of these other weeks he was playing really poorly. On top of them missing all their weapons, it doesn't help the situation. They did pick up Deontay Johnson to make up for losing. Who'd they lose here? Obviously, Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell. So they did pick up Deontay Johnson. They tried to force him into forcing the ball last week. They gave him 25% target share in a garbage time, or not garbage time, but basically while the starters rested last week in the last game that they played of the season. So Deontay Johnson did get some work in the offense, just not with CJ Stroud. So you still have that uncertainty there. But Deontay Johnson was let go by the Ravens recently. So, we could get next week, maybe. I don't know how things are going to shake out, but we could see a Baltimore Chargers game potentially, depending on how things go with that. So actually, I don't know if we can see it next week. It'd have to be further down the line, but it would be interesting to see a Baltimore versus Houston game, just for that, the fact of the situation with Deontay Johnson. So as far as the Baltimore side, Zay Flowers is out. That's a big piece of the puzzle here. Last Showdown show I did, where I broke down the Steelers versus the Ravens, I liked Isaiah Likely because Nelson Aguilar was out, and Nelson Aguilar is the primary slot receiver, and that was going to give Isaiah Likely more opportunity in more two tight end sets, more opportunity to run more routes, and more routes in the slot. And that ended up being, coming to fruition. He ended up scoring a touchdown in that game. I had him in the captain, built the winning Showdown lineup on that show. And the whole reasoning for Isaiah Likely was because Nelson Aguilar was out. Now Flowers is out. Flowers is running about 38% of his routes in the slot. So that's a big hit in the slot for them. Nelson Aguilar is going to pick up a lot of that slack, but I think that Isaiah Likely will pick up some of that slack too. Who else is going to be picking up the slack is Rashad Bateman. Rashad Bateman is in the best matchup on Baltimore, with Pittsburgh giving up 26 DraftKings points a game to wideouts. So that's a really good matchup for Rashad Bateman. We'll check and see what his ownership is. But you can see in his previous games against Pittsburgh, only 5 DraftKings points. And what did he do in the other week? 8.4 DraftKings points. But like I said, we're talking about Zay Flowers being out. So let's get an idea of Rashad Bateman's ownership here. Bateman's at 44.3% owned. So that's actually a really high ownership. Let's check out and see what Nelson Aguilar is. Nelson Aguilar is at 10%. So that's another way we can get different, because Nelson Aguilar is going to be taking on more of the Zay Flowers workload, and some of that attention might be shifted to Rashad Bateman in this game. So Rashad Bateman's definitely going to have a good matchup and good potential in this one, but I think that Nelson Aguilar might be a little sneaky for us with the absence of Zay Flowers. And like I said, like the reason why we liked Isaiah Likely in that last game was because Nelson Aguilar was out, and it was going to open things up in the slot. We also liked Zay Flowers in that game because he was going to get more work in the slot. Well, now Nelson Aguilar is going to be getting a boatload of work in the slot in this game. So I do like Nelson Aguilar in this game. He's going to be interesting. Let's go through the other receivers while we're here. I said I like Pickens, Bateman. Quentin Johnson has that difficult Stingley matchup. Calvin Austin could be interesting if they decide to focus on Pickens. Austin's a nice way to go if you want to pivot. I did like him in that game against Cincinnati. That game versus Baltimore is where I said either put in Calvin Austin or put in the Ravens D. Well, Calvin Austin ended up scoring 10 points in that one. Unfortunately, though, the Ravens D ended up outscoring him, and my only lineup that I put in that contest, I had Calvin Austin instead of the Ravens D, so I didn't come in first in that one, even though it basically built the winning lineup on the show. So let's go with looking at some more of these guys. Deontay Johnson, talked about him. Be interesting to see what kind of usage he gets. Mechie is going to be interesting. Mechie will be interesting with no Tank Dell in the game. Let's see real quick. The Chargers are giving up 16.9 DraftKings points a game to slot receivers, and that's where Mechie's going to be running most of his routes. I didn't see how many routes Deontay Johnson ran in the slot, but if Deontay is going to be a slot receiver as well, that will be interesting for us. But I do think that with Mechie running as much as he does in the slot, that's going to make him a primary target for us. And let's see. Just checking something here real quick as far as points allowed. Yeah, so 16.9 in the slot. They're only allowing a 29.4 target rate to slot receivers, but they're still allowing a decent amount of DraftKings points. Wideouts versus the Chargers are getting 24.8 DraftKings points a game, but with Nico Collins, he's probably going to be heavily covered. That also makes the slot more interesting with this susceptibility that they have on top of it. The Chargers, McConkey's getting 15 DraftKings points a game in the slot. I can't remember if I mentioned that earlier or not, but yeah, I do like McConkey's situation too. I like Aguilar. Williams could be interesting. He's just not getting enough targets. Trying to see if there's anyone on the cheap seats here. Darius Davis could be interesting in this game. Let's go over and check out the injury situation here. Darius Davis, a guy I've talked up a lot. If you watched this show over the past couple years, he's come through for us a couple times. Scored some touchdowns when I had him recommended. I think the latest one was, which game was that? That would have been in either the New England game or the Denver game. It was a showdown game, whatever it was, and he ended up scoring a touchdown for us in a showdown slate. So Darius Davis, he's been getting some targets, just not enough targets. I think he's a little too thin for a 2-game slate. He's more of a showdown play. Keep him in mind if you're playing showdown. Hutchinson, let's check this. Let's go over here and check this snap share for these Texans. All right, so this I'm using Fantasy Pros. Going to go check out the recent snap shares for the Texans. Week 18 doesn't really count because they rested the starters. But let's look at Week 17. We saw 21% for Robert Woods. Nico Collins had 40%. Mechie had 40%. That's great. Hutchinson had 39%. I think Hutchinson will probably be the one who takes the biggest hit potentially with Deontay joining the team. I would say that he probably takes the biggest hit with Deontay joining the team. So Hutchinson, not as big a fan of him as I am of Mechie. Mechie did have that big game for us on Showdown a few weeks ago. That was the one where he scored 18 DraftKings points, came through like a hero for us. I think I had him in the captain in that one, or I had him in a significant amount of lineups, and it was because Detroit's weakness against slot receivers. Well, we're looking at another team that not quite as weak against slot receivers, but they are susceptible against slot receivers. So should be a pretty good game for Mechie this week, especially with no Tank Dell and playing time that he's going to get. Nelson Aguilar, the other guy I like, 3,400 for Nelson Aguilar. That's going to give us some salary relief for a guy who could potentially have a significantly expanded role with Zay Flowers out this week. Moving on to tight end, Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely, other guys that are going to benefit from Zay Flowers being out, especially Isaiah Likely, who I think is going to be more in the slot. this week. Pat Freiermuth has not done well against Baltimore historically. And this season against Baltimore, he had 4.6 DraftKings points and 3.4 DraftKings points. So not very good for Freiermuth. On top of that, even though like Baltimore's allowing a decent amount of DraftKings points per game to the tight end position, they're allowing 13 DraftKings points a game, but still, like Freiermuth just historically has not done that great against this team. So play him if you want. I probably would go away from that play. I think there's other plays on the slate as far as Will Dissly and the Houston tight ends, Dalton Schultz. Each of these teams has been stout against tight ends, so not really much to go with there. I think my tight ends leanings are going to be Likely and Andrews. I just think that they have the far and away the best matchups on the slate. And let's see, as far as ownership, get a look at tight end ownership here. Andrews is going to be the top owned guy at about 42%. So Likely could be our play here at tight end if we're looking for a lower owned guy. They should, get a pretty even split at the tight. Like Mark Andrews has been getting a ton of work recently, but I think with Zay Flowers out, that's going to bump up Likely for us. So let's. I think I covered everything. Mixon. Let's see if I see any nuggets on Mixon. Chargers have allowed the league low 4 rushing touchdowns to running backs. That's not good for Mixon either. A guy that's going to be touchdown dependent. According to Rich Rebar, no team allowed more touchdowns to slot receivers than the Texans. So that's another plus for our McConkey situation. So let's go ahead and build this lineup. Already talked about wanting to do Russ Wilson, so let's put him with Pickens. We're going to need Pickens to have a decent game in order for Russ Wilson to be relevant for us. And let's give him Jaylen Warren too. Just like we did in that showdown slate. Warren. And I didn't like a whole lot in that game, but I had Warren, and I can't remember who else I had. I have to go back and check, see if it's anything significant that we want to put in our comment section later on when we get closer to lock. But I was not a fan of the Steelers that day. I'm a bigger fan of the Steelers this week now that they have Pickens back. I think they'll have a much more competent offense. On the other side, let's give Likely that tight end spot. As far as our other running back, since we got Russ in there, let's go ahead and put Henry in there. We'll see where that leaves us in a minute here. I like McConkey. As far as the defense, I think I would go with either Chargers or the Steelers and maybe lean a little bit more towards the Chargers in this one. Chargers are the, one of the teams in the NFL that lead in sacks. And meanwhile, CJ Stroud has taken one of the most quarterbacks with the most sacks this season. So not a good situation there. If we want to put Nico Collins in our lineup, that's going to leave us for 4K. And guess who that leaves us with? Nelson Aguilar. So, I mean, that's an interesting way to go. We got a nice game stack on this Pittsburgh versus Baltimore game. I think it has the potential to be more competitive, probably a lower scoring game, but I think both these games are going to be low scoring. And judging from the ownership overall, if I'm looking at overall ownership, I'm seeing most of it falling on this Houston Chargers game as far as the highest owned guys. So I think we can get a little bit different by focusing on the Pittsburgh game. And I do think a lot of the attention is going to be on like Rashad Bateman in that game. And that's going to give, and Mark Andrews, that's going to give us a natural pivot to Isaiah Likely and Nelson Aguilar if we're focusing in on that slot, missing Zay Flowers, and maybe we get a little bit more work from those guys in the slot, and that could help us out with our lineup construction. Gets us Derrick Henry in there, gets us Ladd McConkey, George Pickens, Nico Collins. We got all the studs basically, and then we got some high upside guys like Jaylen Warren, Isaiah Likely, and potentially Nelson Aguilar. So that's a good way to go, I think, with lineup building. Let's clear it out. And let's go a different direction here. Let's say that we want to start someone in this Chargers game. Let's go with Herbert. Let's give him McConkey. And normally I'd want to give a second wide receiver, but maybe we give him Dobbins instead. Or actually, yeah, Dobbins instead. And let's run it back with Nico. And on the other game, I talked up Warren. Let's get him in there. Let's look at our defense. Let's give the Chargers defense in this one too. Tight end, let's get Likely in there. Let's get our guy in this one too. Going to leave us with 8,200, and that leaves us with options like Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon, George Pickens. Like, pick your weapon there. I don't hate George Pickens, and I don't hate Derrick Henry. If we want to choose one of the studs from that game, I think Henry was probably going to be the best option there. If we put Henry in there, well, I don't know if we're going to be able to put Henry in there and take another guy out. So yeah, I think Henry is basically the only guy that fits. If we wanted to put in here, okay, so let's use this lineup as it is. Let's clear that out. We've seen that it leaves us a spot for Henry. If we want to do a Lamar Jackson lineup and get a little bit different with it, let's put in Lamar. Let's put in Aguilar. We've seen his ownership, 10%. That's going to get us against 10% of the field right there. So we got Aguilar and Jackson. Let's give him Justice Hill, because in this game, it's going to be a little bit playing from behind. So we're going to need Pickens in there. And probably Warren too. I think those are the guys that are going to be keys to the success of Pittsburgh if they're going to have any success this week. I think Pickens and Warren have to have decent games. And maybe instead of Warren, if you wanted to use Najee Harris instead, you could go in that route too. Let's get McConkey in there. McConkey's probably my favorite play on the slate, just based on the matchup situation. Let's give him another pass catcher. Let's put in Isaiah Likely. It's probably too many at this point, pass catchers for Lamar. Let's go ahead and give the Chargers defense in this one too. So let's go with Andrews instead of Likely. And let's take oh no, we need Aguilar in this one. All right, let's leave him in there. Nico Collins gets us Nico Collins. You obviously don't want to put him in the flex if they are the early game. So swap out a guy for him in the flex. But there's a way to get a little bit different with your Lamar Jackson lineup. Play it like they're playing from behind. Make sure you got guys like Pickens and Warren in there if you're playing like Baltimore's playing or Pittsburgh's playing with a lead. If you wanted to swap out Warren with Najee, the price difference is Warren actually is a little bit more expensive, so that get you $200. maybe if you do this lineup, do a version with Najee in it because, if Pittsburgh is playing with a lead, Najee's going to be running more. So at least I would imagine that he would be, but they've been kind of split down the middle lately, no matter what. So you could use Warren, you could use Najee. Just do two versions of a lineup if you're going to go in a direction like that, and that should pretty much cover things there. All right, let's go into let's take a brief look at Showdown real quick. Going to look at that Baltimore game. Actually, no, I'm going to save that for its own separate show. I'm going to look at the other game. Let's look at Houston and the Chargers. Hit that like button. Give me the 30 likes so I can put out a shorter video later on. Hit that like button. I'll put out the Showdown show later on. And subscribe to the channel. Help me get to 1,600. I need about 80 to get there. So I want to get there by the end of wild card round. So I definitely appreciate it if you haven't subscribed already. And that way you get the alerts when that Showdown show hits. And I'm also going to be doing a Sunday show breaking down the three-game Sunday slate. And we'll also do a Monday Showdown show as well. I'll do a 6-game in the comments. In the comment section, give me the 30 likes, and I'll write my favorite plays in the comment section. I just haven't researched those other games yet. I've been focused on Saturday, so I don't have competent information to give you guys on the 6-game slate. All right, so if I'm going this way, McConkey is by far my favorite play in this one, and that could be, basically the entire field feeling the same way. Let me get an idea and see if I get some projections on the ownership on McConkey. All right. Looking at the captain ownerships, Collins, McConkey is going to be. McConkey's relatively cheap in the captain. He's only at about 14%. I would have expected him to be the highest owned guy on the slate in the captain spot. Dobbins is interesting at 8.1%. Quentin Johnson, if you want to go for a home run, but he just has that Stingley matchup. Mechie, also interesting in this one at about 1% ownership. And if you watch my show, not afraid to put those scrubby looking guys in the captain has hit big for us with a few recently. Ricky Pearsall, to name one. And then we had Isaiah Likely, to name another one. And those were just in the last month or so. So a lot of these scrubby guys are hitting for us in the captain. Let's keep them in mind. McConkey. I want Herbert. I want Dobbins too, I think. On the other side, I want Nico. It's going to leave us with 2,400 per guy. Darius Davis, our Showdown guy. And 2,500, that leaves us with, Gus Edwards. Why is he 2K? Doesn't have an injury designation for Sunday's wild card game. They've been keeping him healthy. He's going to get goal line carries in this one. So Gus Edwards is at 2K is too cheap. Let's get Dobbins out of there. Let's put Gus Edwards in there. Let's leave us with 10K. That's going to enable us to put Stroud in there if we wanted to. Stroud, I don't hate. Stroud to Collins. And then we'd have Herbert to McConkey and Darius Davis. And then we got, we could take Darius Davis even and give us Dicker the kicker. And that leaves us with 7K. Josh Palmer is out. That is an interesting one, too. Because if Palmer is out, what is the situation with DJ Chark? 7 point. He got 3 targets and 4 targets his last couple games. Let's go over to Fantasy Pros over here. Let's see what DJ Chark has been doing for his snap counts. DJ Chark, 37% in Week 18. I can't remember if they rested their starters in that week. I'll check that in a second. Quentin Johnson had 55%. 23% for Darius Davis. That's pretty good. With Josh Palmer out, it looks like DJ Chark, they've been trying to integrate him. 29%, 37%. So they've been steadily increasing his usage there. Where's Ladd McConkey? Oh, there he is, 51%. So they've been slowly increasing his usage there. And with Josh Palmer out, we see that he got 37% snap share. He's at 1,200 in this game. DJ Chark is a guy that we can keep in our player pools. Let's put Chark in there instead of those other guys. Gonna leave us with 11-3. If you want to get Mixon in there, that's your little sneaky way to get Mixon in there is put in DJ Chark. Let's get an idea of his ownership. Looking at total ownership, about 14% for DJ Chark. That might actually be high. What's Darius Davis? Davis is under 10%. So Chark or Davis, take your pick on those guys. I do like Chark at 1,200. That's going to give us the option to get Mixon in the lineup if we want to get Mixon in there, or Stroud you could put and leave salary on the table. But that's going to be a way for us to build a lineup. Now, I mentioned I like Mechie. So if we put Mechie in this instead, he's at 4K. That's going to leave us with 8,500. You can get Quentin Johnson in there if you want. I don't like the matchup. Let's get Edwards out. You know what? Let's get Edwards out and put Chark back in real quick. Let's put Dobbins in. That leaves us with 3,700. So that leaves us in not enough for Mechie. Not enough for Mechie there. But you got Hutchinson. If you wanted Hutchinson or Deontay Johnson, you'd have them as options. Mechie, I think, is my favorite of those guys. Let's do something real quick with Mechie and the captain. This is just an experimental thing. Let's get Collins. Let's get Mixon. Let's get Herbert and McConkey in there. Leaves us with 3,200. 3,200. We could put Deontay. We could put Darius Davis. We could put DJ Chark in there. So that's a pretty interesting way to go. If we put DJ Chark in there, get Mechie out of that captain, leaves us with 8K for a captain option. Chargers defense. That would be interesting. Fairbairn as a captain. Doesn't quite get us to Dicker, the kicker, who I would love to put in as a captain with this lineup. If we take Chark out, does not leave us with many options, unfortunately. So Chargers D in the captain would leave us with enough to put in Chark as our final guy if we wanted to. I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense. It should be like a game where maybe we see more out of the defenses in this one. Let's put Let's put McConkey back in that captain spot. Because now that I mentioned it, that Chargers defense probably have to go without Mixon in this one. Let's swap that out to Dicker the kicker, maybe. Nah, I don't like that direction. I like Mechie. Let's put the Chargers instead of Dicker the kicker, and let's put Mixon in there. And leaves us with Quentin Johnson. I'm going to put Stroud in there. Yeah, just not get us to that Texans D or Will Dissly or something like that. So yeah, it's a tough way to go, but I do think that there's some interest to put Mechie in that captain in this one, just based on Nico Collins. Let's say that Nico Collins gets shut down. Let's put make sure we have McConkey in there. Leaves us with 4,600. You get Schultz, Dissly. Does not get us to that Chargers defense. Or Dicker the kicker. But if we take Stroud out of this one, and if we wanted to go in this direction and put the Chargers defense in there, is this with 8,800? Quentin Johnson again. So he's an option. He's not horrible. You could also get Dicker the kicker, swap him out in there. But it's something to play around with. Like, I think you can be a little experimental in this one. Low scoring game. Generally, you can get those weird captains in there, like Mechie, the Chargers defense, and Dicker the kicker, potential captain options on the cheap side. If we want to play for a shootout, a guy like Mechie works in a shootout scenario as well, because it's going to help us load up on those studs. So let's get Mechie in there. Collins. Let's say Collins, Herbert, McConkey, Dobbins. Leaves us with 3,800, and that puts us in that same range with where we got Deontay Johnson as an option. And then some of these other guys. But you can experiment a little bit with that, but that's a way to go for this showdown. But hit that like button, give me the 30 likes, and put my favorite plays in the comment section later on. And make sure to subscribe to the channel. I'm looking for 1,600 subscribers. I need about 80 left to get there. Good luck, guys, and check out my underdog stuff. I did underdog, a couple pick'em videos, and you can get a 50% deposit match up to $1,000 if you use the promo code SEEK over on Underdog. And they still got playoff best ball going on, so you can hammer out a bunch of lineups in the mitten, which is a $5 contest. They have a $3 contest right now. If you're feeling like you're very confident in your ability to draft, they got the $500 contest as well. So, all right, guys, check that out, and good luck with this slate. And I'll be back with a Sunday slate, and I'll try to get a 6-game slate up too, but I want to see 30 likes. You're going to have to do it quickly because this is Friday night, and I want to try to get a 6-game up before the slate locks. So good luck, guys.